Hello and welcome to the India Briefing. This is Mukulika Banerjee from London, and I'm joined by my co-host Pragya Tiwari from New Delhi. Today, we are going to do a slightly unusual episode where we are going to talk about the iconic Indian garment, the sari. Now, the sari, for those of you who know, is basically a 5-meter piece of fabric which is wrapped around the body, draped in various different styles. You will have seen Indian women wear them in India and across the world. It is an unusual garment because it is asymmetric. So when it's draped on the body, it looks different to, say, any kind of tailored garment. And because it is unstitched and draped, a woman controls the way she looks and presents herself to the world in a sari. You will see Indian women represent India in a variety of different settings, whether it's the Olympic Games, airline crews, police women, teachers, politicians, film stars, farmers, bankers, all wear saris on a regular basis. It's their working clothing. It's not a kimono. It's not a costume. It is everyday wear for Indian women. It is so ubiquitous that we don't actually talk about it enough as a very distinctive and significant part of the Indian landscape. And today we've invited publisher and author Malvika Singh to talk about her new book that is just out called Saris of Memory, Fragments of My Life by Malvika Singh, who has had, as she puts it in her own words, a magnificent obsession with saris. So we want to talk about the sari with Mala. She's a sari enthusiast, knows a lot about saris produced in different parts of India, and we'll talk about these things today. But we'll also, through her memories, through her sari stories, talk about her life, which coincides almost entirely with the life of independent India, when some of the most iconic institutions of India were set up, which have promoted the sari, have promoted textiles, weavers, designs, and really quite profound technical knowledge that weavers of India have. So, Malvika, Mala, welcome to the India Briefing.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to join Mukulika in welcoming you, Mala. Thank you for joining us. And, the book is just about to come out. And even though it's only January, I'm sure that it's going to be one of the most fascinating books of the year. I absolutely love it. And what I think I love most about the book is that it mirrors your life in defying genres, in defying silos. So on the one hand, it makes complete sense to me that someone like you, who's led such an eclectic, diverse, rich life, chooses the sari to talk about her memories and vignettes from her life, and which is why, quite obviously, you call it Saris of Memory. But we're not just talking about personal memory in your sari, we're also talking about collective memory, because this book is as much about cultural history, it's as much about civilizational ethos. So I'm curious what the starting point really was. What is it that you set out to do? Did you set out to write a book about yourself, your life, saris? What was it? What was the starting point?
Well, I don't know where it all started, but as far back as I can remember, which is why I like to refer to it as my first memory, the sari was something that I was always drawn towards. And when I was very young, before I'd become a teenager, I got my first sari. It was from Chanderi. And the picture I've used in my book, actually, when I looked at it, I said, does it look as though I'm wearing a costume for a fancy dress party? Or do I look comfortable in it? And when I looked at that picture, age 75, I said, well, I look very comfortable in it. So that was the starting point. I mean, clearly, when I draped that sari somewhere in my memory, that became my second skin. And I think for me, it's not a conversation with textiles. The conversations one has quietly, invisibly, with things around you, things you bought on a trip, a gift someone's given you. But the textile, whenever I put a sari around me or wear a shawl or anything like that, unstitched, um, I feel it's my second skin. I don't have to explain it. And I think that's where it began. So I said, I want to write a memoir. I want to write a free-flowing memoir. I want to write about everything I was able to do in my life, which was really, it went from being expelled from university, going to drama school, learning direction, theater direction, making films, publishing magazines. It was 180 degrees. So whatever you felt like doing, you meandered into that job. You took that risk. You did what you were motivated to do, not what you were trained for. And I wanted to put this down because when I look at my granddaughter and I think, oh God, they're all in their little silos and things, I want them to hear the stories of my growing up in a country that was so layered and so diverse, and that gave me and my generation an opportunity to meet all kinds of people. I mean, it was right across the board. And there were people like Pupul Jayakar, who was, at that point asked by T.T. Krishnamachari, who was the finance minister of Nehru's first cabinet, to go and start the revival of handlooms. And she knew nothing about it. So when I asked her, how did you learn? She said, well, I was told to go look at a loom and start learning, educate yourself. So that's the process of my growth. Go into the field, learn, talk, experience. It was much more an oral tradition, anecdotal storytelling, and I wanted to bring that part of my life into this book using the experiences I had in the skill, craft, handloom sector, and therefore India in its diversity across the board, travel, rural, urban, small town, all of it came together, and the metaphor was the sari. Because I used that every time we traveled, I'd buy a piece of fabric, a shawl, a fragment, a piece of jeans to make a skirt or a kurta or whatever. And I decided I'd use it as a metaphor to tell that aspect of my life.
And what a brilliant metaphor it is, Mala, because you've managed to talk about, of course, your life, like you said, all these wonderful people who were so iconic to that generation of India post-independence, who were reimagining what this country could come to mean, come to be, who we see ourselves as when we speak of ourselves as Indians and so on. So you've also managed to pay ode to them. You've managed to talk about that generation and modern India's journey from independence to now. But you've also managed to indicate how um, layered and deep our civilization is. And in that sense, I think of Nehru's quote about civilization upon civilization being layered without anyone, really overshadowing the other. And I think that if you look at a collection of saris from across this country, that will be just so apparent for any viewer. And but what I do wonder is, Mukulika said in her introduction that for us, this has not become a costume. This is not something we put on to take photographs in the national dress. Most of us will wear this quite often to go out, to have drinks, to work, to travel, and so on. And I can't help but wonder what is behind the longevity of the sari, because unfortunately, we've not held on to traditions quite so steadfastly either. We see traditions falling apart, falling away all the time around us, but this has stuck. So I wonder what you make of the longevity and what you think is the significance of the fact that this abides.
So I'm looking at it very simplistically. I think unstitched cloth. It doesn't fit into any fad fashion. It's there. It can be draped any which way. It symbolizes infinity for me. my own understanding is that the unstitched length of cloth, be it a turban, be it an angavastram, be it a sari, survives because it is versatile. It doesn't, you can't date it from time immemorial. So let's go to Mohenjo-daro. Mohenjo-daro, you wore because you wanted to cover your body. You then got bored maybe with the Kora color. I mean, no color, just the natural. So you dipped it into indigo. You're wearing an Ajrak sari. You dip it into indigo, that is the sky. The other color, the counter color, is a madder, which is the earth. Earth and sky were your inspiration for motif. So if you look at the sari you're wearing, the darker blue spot on your sari is a symbol of stars. If you look at it, it's got its star-like pointed corners. The madder is earth. What do you take as a motif from earth? You take a leaf, you take a bud, you take a branch of a tree, you take a flower. And all that comes together symbolically and in a stylistic manner to create the Ajrak sari. That Ajrak sari travels all the way down to the coast. It passes Rajasthan, something else is added, another motif is added, it goes further down. It encompasses history. This is my language, okay? I mean, this is how I see it. If you look at the other side, ikat comes from Southeast Asia, it comes to India. Most people believe it went from India. I think it came from Southeast Asia. These are all stories of trade, conversations of period in time, eras. Unstitched again, ikat, the sarong, backstrap loom, again, shawls, presentation scarves, all unstitched. Ajrak and ikat, to me, are techniques that will abide. They will just carry on and on because the technique of ikat is actually a computer. It's in the head. It's a computer in the head of the weaver. The fact that they can resist color from entering pattern by tying and dyeing and have a recurring pattern appear without any change of shape, size, placement is a computer. And it's in the head. It's passed down. It's not written down. If you go to the Kani shawl, all the different colors that bring together, let's say, this pattern, are sung out by the weaver. They sing the pattern as they throw the colored spindles to create the floral pattern. I mean, this is information technology that is alive. We keep on talking about IT and computer science and all of this. But this is the real information technology of the subcontinent.
Of course, it's not just information technology in that sense of the word. It's also a conversation between generations because these were skills that were passed on. They were not, you couldn't go
And if
anywhere
I
to
may,
learn
I
them.
think
There
it's
were no
conversations between cultures. Because in the trade, early trade, it was trade of fabric. Let's say trade of fabric, it cross-culture. There were no boundaries. So you took color, you took motif, you took texture from different cultural connects and partnerships, and you wove them into the fabric. For instance, there's a sari in the book which has Art Deco motifs. There's a Banarsi sari with Art Deco motifs on the body of the sari, and the traditional shikarga, which is the hunting scene, animals hunting, the tiger hunting a deer on the border. Now that's a conversation. That is modernism having a conversation with traditional Banaras motif. And shikarga is what? During the hunting, you had shikargas, which were rest houses when you went on a shoot. That's represented. And then you've got this modernism with a little bit of Art Nouveau thrown into it because of the motif. I mean, it's a mix between a modernist motif and an Art Nouveau motif. So that's from Banaras. The weaver is ready to weave it today. The sari in the book was woven during COVID. Just look at the way you can work in this country on the loom. I just rang the guy. I said, I want this sari reproduced. We couldn't meet. It was all on the telephone. And he said, what color should it be? So I said, I don't have the color chart, but why don't you just go and sit on the ghat and watch the sunset? And whatever color comes in the sky, put that into the wall. That's that sari. And he said, the second sari, I said, just buy a pack of Amul butter, that pale yellow. You're not going to get that in a Neelam thread chart. You're going to get it by actually working on the dye to bring that very pale yellow in. And he did both the saris. And this is 2 years ago. So what I'm trying to say is that it is history. It is our history. It's our skill. It's our philosophy. It's our caring about beauty. There is a great caring for beauty, and it all comes from nature. You sit on the, Amavatya is a color. It's also the dark night, but it's a slate color. It's not black, chemical dye. It's slightly less than that. It's slate. You call it Amavasya. If you talk to a weaver in Banaras and I say, Haldi ki sari bana do, he is making it in the exact color of turmeric. He is not going to 217 on the chart. And that information is alive in all these people, in the dyer, in the weaver, in conversations under a tree in the village or in the small town. And we've neglected it, and I just wanted to celebrate that. And also, one thing before I forget, my generation had the privilege of being just middle class people who were professional, and you could meet everybody, people who were forging policy, people who were risking something, people were looking for new ideas. Everyone came together. Nobody said, there were no silos that, that person, oh, he's a bureaucrat, senior bureaucrat, so some student from the art school can't have a conversation. We didn't live in that kind of time. Pupul Jayakar would pull me out and say, you know what are you doing this summer? Nothing, go do this, and throw you into the deep end. And I remember her saying to me, if you fail, I'll take the flag. And if you succeed, the accolade is yours. Now, those were the real gurus. And those, for me, she was a mentor because of that kind of attitude. And I think that gave us the freedom of spirit. And that freedom of spirit, I see as something which is the legacy of this country reflected in textiles, skill of the hands, be it craft, be it making a pot, be it putting the pot into a kiln which is not tempered correctly, but the pot will come out with funny spots on it, which look like, I don't know, Isamu Naguchi. So that spirit of freedom of expression, of engagement, of imbibing, of risking, that was our generation.
No, Mala, well, another very important thing that you brought up right now, of course, is that this book is, you addressed this. I was hoping to bring it up later, but I'm glad you addressed it already, that this book is also a celebration of the Indian design ethos. It's also a celebration of the Indian aesthetic. And even though it is such a diverse country culturally, I think there's something very distinctive about the Indian aesthetic. And I will come back to your point about that post-independence generation to who you pay ode in this book. But I wanted to turn to you, Mukulika, for a second. You're also wearing a beautiful sari. Very quickly, if you could tell us about it. But also the coincidence here is that you've also worked, you are, of course, a social political anthropologist, but you've also co-authored a book on this sari. And I was in an earlier conversation with Mala, I was talking about how the sari can, can open the doors to a million stories. So with that in mind, I wonder if you'd like to share what your particular lens was. What did you go out looking for when you wanted to tell the story of the sari?
So Thank you, Pragya, for allowing me to talk about the book. This was a book that I co-authored with my colleague Daniel Miller, who is a material culture anthropologist, right? So he's interested in materiality. He has studied fashion and written about it and so on in the West. What the reason why we wrote the book is because our publisher, who became our publisher, a very good friend who ran Berg Publishers and now with Bloomsbury, said, look, when you wear the sari muku in London, and you wear it all the time, and I do, I wear it to work. It's not a costume here either. I wear it regularly. There is a certain way in which you manage the sari, despite commuting or teaching or moving around a city in a sari. There is a certain ease with which that happens, and that's just so different to the kind of fashions that we see here in London. The language of fashion is about trends and what is in and what is out and about lengths and height and cuts and so on. Whereas here is this unstitched piece of fabric that you drape very elegantly, she said very kindly. I'm sure not, but nevertheless, is how I draped it. But as an anthropologist, as a counterpoint to what Mala is saying, it wasn't a personal story that I wanted to tell, but I was very much shaped by the growing up in New Delhi, where I did. And, as part of what the anthropologist Emma Tallow before us had called the ethnic revolution, when suddenly it became trendy for young people at university, when I was at university in the 80s in Delhi, if you wanted to come across as well-dressed and with it, then you wore Indian prints, you wore Indian fabrics, you wore oxidized silver jewelry. And this aesthetic was reflected in cinema, it was there in theatre, it was there in the arts, and it was there in women like Pupul Jayakar and Indira Gandhi as Prime Minister, representing the country, the big festivals of India that were happening across the world, which, Mala, you write about in your book, getting to meet people like Martand Singh and Rajiv Sethi in Delhi. So one was very shaped by that sensibility, but the book as an anthropologist, I really wanted to make about a much wider cross-section of women in India, to look at women outside my class and caste who also wore the sari every day as clothing. And we wanted, Danny and I wanted to bring the life of that sari, that everyday workaday sari that is ubiquitous on the Indian landscape out in the book. But we started with something very fundamental. And again, this is the sort of interest in materiality that Danny brought to the project, was to actually think about the relationship of the woman and her sari. It's something that anyone who wears a sari takes completely for granted. It's like, if somebody said, oh, she drives a car, to actually think about what is the relationship between you and the car. It was, what is the relationship between a woman and a sari? Because it was completely different to wearing a piece of tailored clothing. And as one of our informants said to us, wearing a sari is like having a conversation with it all day. You can't just wear it and forget about it. You're constantly adjusting it, tightening it, loosening it, repleating it. Very subtly, you're not fidgeting, but every time you sit down, you stand up, you make very tiny adjustments to make sure that the sari is comfortable. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. Right? And this is, the driving metaphor works very well again. And somebody else said, it's like driving a car. There comes a time when you don't think, where's the clutch? Where's the accelerator?
It just happens.
Have I put my seatbelt on? It is, you just wear the sari and you go. And that is the kind of proficiency that most women aspire to, really, with the sari, that you don't think about it beyond a point. But it only comes with that cultivation of practice, of doing it again and again and again. I'm sure when Mala wears a sari in the morning, she's not fussing over every pleat in the same way, nor is she thinking about it all the time. And I certainly aspire to that
Never
level
do.
of familiarity and proficiency. But what we found, Pragya, was that, when you look at the vast millions of Indian women who are wearing the sari on an everyday basis, you really have to make two or three different kinds of distinctions. One is the primary one of the textile itself. The world of handloom and design and craft that Mana has so eloquently, been talking about, which I too share that love for that world and the respect for that knowledge that weavers have. That proportion of the saris on the Indian landscape is a tiny one. Most Indian women wearing the sari, I do village-based fieldwork. All the women in the village wear a sari, but none of them are wearing handloom. They're wearing mill-made cotton saris, which are printed, and they are wash and wear. They have two saris. They wear one, they wash one, and then the next day it swaps around. But the key thing is they also have a third sari, which is their best sari. And that sari is a sari that is a handloom sari, and they will not wear that every day because if you wash it too often, the colors will fade. They're not chemicals. And that is what is beautiful, as Mala has been saying, about their very particular tonality and texture. And that is, so they save it. It's their best sari, it's their precious sari, it's what they'll wear for festivals, they'll wear to when they go to
Wedding.
vote on election day, weddings. And so that's the first thing, so 90%, when we wrote the book in it was published in 2003, in the beginning of this century, we found that more than 90% of saris worn in India are made in mills, not on handlooms. And that is something worth reversing anytime. The second thing is that if you look across professions, women wear and adopt the sari and choose to wear the sari. Yes, there are patriarchal norms. One should not romanticize this so much that to forget that there are certain families in which once you're married, you're expected to wear the sari. So there is some notion of patriarchal control. But I have to say that the majority of the women we spoke with across India, and we did the research across India, across region, across class, across caste, was that they chose to wear the sari because it was the most functional garment. Now, let me give you an example of functionality, because, and I think it's worth talking about this because most people thinking about the sari from the outside, whether they are women who could wear the sari or indeed men of all kinds, would think, gosh, what's this cumbersome thing that you have wrapped around 5 meters of fabric around it? Doesn't it impede movement? Isn't it restrictive? Doesn't it stop you from doing certain things? And if, say, you listen to a paddy farmer, right? What she said was, I tie my sari. Of course, in a village, we're all wearing saris. And of course, village women and anyone who does any kind of manual work, it might be domestic help staff in urban homes, they tie their saris higher above their ankles. So there is much greater freedom of movement. But when she walks to the village, to the fields, she's wearing her sari as is. She gets to the field, she needs to not have anything flapping about. And she certainly does not want to get her sari wet. Her paddy field is flooded with water a lot of the time. So she has the flexibility to pick up the sari, hitch it up, and tuck it into her waist, giving her much greater freedom of movement, but also sparing the sari from getting wet. She can tuck the pallu, the bit that goes over the shoulder, and tuck it into the waistband. So she's compact, she can stay dry, she can work in the field. And when she comes out of the field, she can't walk home with her sari hitched up because that would be considered immodest. Showing legs is considered immodest in large parts of India. But then instantly, in a moment, she can lower the sari, go back to looking modest, go back. Now, the point what we were making here, therefore, was that, we and Mala, you write about modernity and what we consider as modern. in the contemporary world, and whether synthetic fibers and Western fashions are modern. But actually, if you look at the sort of academic philosophical work on modernity and about multiplicity of roles that the self can inhabit, we actually conclude that the sari is the quintessential modern garment, because it allows a woman to inhabit different roles, right? So you can be modest, you can be functional, you can be a commuter, you can be seductive, you can be authoritative, all in one day without changing your clothing. You don't need different wardrobe for each of these things. So we land up with this sort of counterintuitive conclusion in the book, saying, contrary to popular perception, actually the sari emerges in India by talking to these vast numbers of Indian women as a thoroughly modern garment. So that's the main takeaway from the book.
That's lovely. I wanted to, it's made me think of a couple of things, and I'm going to try and pick up all these threads. But, one thing that, Mala, I did want you to talk about, before we move on to anything else, is that we've so far, everything that Mukulika said, I've said, you said, we've been sort of implying that the sari is ubiquitous. It's always been part of our civilization. It continues to be part of our civilization, and that's not wrong. But handloom saris, and that's an important distinction that Mukulika made. Handloom was all but wiped out, due to the very exploitative policies of the British government when India was not independent. Now, I won't get into too much detail. Anyone interested in this, cursory Google search will tell you exactly what went on. But when the handloom industry in India was impacted, so were the skilled artisans in the sense of the dyers and the pattern makers and the weavers and so on. And a lot of people from the 50s and 40s will tell you that back then, even though they could see these beautiful saris of yore, they couldn't find a single, hand block, sort of block print block to be able to recreate these saris, because over decades, these industries, these artisans, these, skilled professions had been greatly impacted by the policies that the British government had brought on. Now, in the 50s, in the late 40s and 50s, it fell upon a generation of some of who were your mentors, Mala, to then revive some of these industries, revive some of these traditions. And if today I'm wearing an ajrak and you're wearing a kani and she's wearing a kalamkari, I think we have that generation to thank the most, that this still remains with us. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Pragya, you're familiar with when Pupul sent Ritu Kumar to Farrukhabad to look for hand blocks, they were all there. The hand block printers were all there. Cotton was being exported out of the country to England, baled and sent off. So there was definitely a dip in it, but the skill didn't go, because in small units in the villages, those skills carried on. Banaras didn't stop functioning. Banaras continued. Kanjivaram continued. There was no stoppage of the weaving tradition and skill. I think what happened, I don't know enough about this, of what happened historically, but post-independence, when Pupul and I were asked to revive it, it was very clear. It was too expensive to clothe India in Khadi or in handloom. Out of proportion. And therefore, what you said about, the two saris, the wash and wear, and you keep the one handloom, that fell into being. But even then, when Dhirubai brought in powerloom saris, the prints that he did originally, which were floral prints, never worked in the market. He had to now print ikat patterns. He had to make the palla and the border like the handloom sari, printed. He did bandhani patterns. I remember buying a Vimal sari with bandhani. Because the women wanted their familiar motif and color. They wanted the palla, the drape over the head. They wanted all that. But they couldn't afford the handloom, and so wash and wear and what we used to call terraline came in. And, one can talk endlessly about this, the rights and wrongs of all this. But at that point, Mapu and Pupul decided to categorize the handloom revival, as you put it, as patronage art. So you endorse those looms and Festival of India, because in between there was a trough and then Festival of India. So let's go there. You up the game. And the looms started again because you paid the price for it. And so there was one generation and a second generation that went back to their traditional skill because they got enough income out of it. And then there was a drop again. And today it's very interesting because a lot of young people are suddenly sponsoring looms and wanting to go back to different kinds of weaves and starting little stand-up boutiques and all of that kind of thing. There's a huge revival. I mean, when I did this little revival in Venkatgiri, the weaver came out and said, what you're doing here is you're bringing patterns that I can remember my grandfather used to weave. Because I just went back to the basics.
Sorry, Mala, I'm going to interrupt you. For those who haven't read the book, if you could just explain, and I think this would be a good, illustrated by example would be the perfect way to talk about it. One is, I just want to say that you mentioned Mapu, that's Martand Singh, for those who are not familiar, cultural historian, archivist, and revivalist. But I think if you could use the Venkatgiri example and perhaps also the Maheshwari example, two sets of examples that you were personally involved in, to kind of talk about the process of what one has to go through. Because like you said, the skill is there, but how do you then go about reviving it?
So let me just give you this Mapu example. Martand Singh, here's this guy, and I'm going to cut not to the early days. Early days were HHEC, Handloom Handicrafts Export Corporation. Both of us, it was our first job together at the same time, 1970. And then he went on to the Calico Museum because, if you're connected and someone says, bright young kid, come and run the museum. Good aesthetic, good knowledge, can read, all of this. We were given great opportunities. And we took them and ran with them. Okay, that too I want to say. Come Festival of India. Pupul actually threw us all into the deep end, be it Rajiv Sethi, be it Martand Singh. Now, Martand Singh's success is because he met Rakesh Thakur, who is a trained textile designer from NID, who understood technique. He understood the loom. He understood how to construct a loom. And then together, the impresario and the technician created Vishwakarma. One without the other would never have happened. Indira Gandhi and Pupul Jayakar decided that they wanted to showcase Indian skill to the world because there had been a silence in that area for some years. While India was preoccupied building its infrastructure, now was the time to use what you all call soft power. For me, Festival India was our strongest power. It was our root. Our soft power is the stock market because it goes up and down and we don't know where it's going to take us. This is rooted. So Pupul and Indira Gandhi decided on doing this. And the entire liberal class of intelligentsia damned them for spending money for these extravaganzas abroad and all of this, which is our want, as we all know. And we all were sort of a bit skeptical, at which point Mapu said to me, why don't we get involved in this? We got involved with Pupul. She gave us projects to do. And Festival in India happened and it was salutary because it put Indian aesthetics, sensibility, cultural histories, all of that back in the international arena. And the impact was not immediate, but it filtered Thai silk, which was very popular out of Thailand, till Festivals of India happened. Indian silk had taken a second position. suddenly we were back in the market. As a part of the festivals of India, we did something called Vishwakarma, where Pupul said, just go and get samples, examples made now, at that time, of the great weaving traditions, painting traditions of India. And that's what happened. Every state was represented with some tradition or the other, including a sari which we can't make now for some reason, Kodali Karapur, which is very difficult to make because it's got three elements that come into one making of this of a product. We're still working on that. So Vishwakarma happened, and the excitement was that the skill was still alive in 85 or 84 or whatever in the mid-80s. Something that had been going on for years. It was all there. And there was this huge revival. And it gave pride to the weaver. It gave pride to artisanal communities, because Rajiv Sethi then handled the craft end of it and did, what is it called? Golden Eye in New York, where he took, let's say, damascening of a sword. I mean, we used to make them. We used to make beautiful stuff here. So it all died as a craft. It's not just the looms had gone quiet. All craft had diminished. And there was a great revival again. So, and that carried on because then the markets opened up. So you could use damascening for forks and knives. You didn't have to make daggers. So you found, and I hate to call it a revival, it was a rejuvenation of the skill, because revival implies a design input. And here I want to say that there was a period in time when there was a lull because the designer would go to a weaver and say, Acha, now Bombay market would like a broad border. So why don't you take this narrow border, for instance, in Maheshwar, and multiply it 4 times? Those saris sold one time. And then stocks were left because Maheshwar was identified with a thin border. So you can fiddle around. So that comes back to what you said about fashion, cut, style, changing the grid. You can play around with it, but it doesn't work. So during COVID, my daughter-in-law said to me, why don't you just create 21 textiles? We were sitting at home. Give them your dream sequence. And I did that. And in the process of that, I actually said, why don't we go back to Venkatgiri? Because I'd seen a woman called Prema Srinivasan at a wedding 20 years ago, wearing a Venkatgiri sari. And it just registered in my mind's eye and couldn't find a sari like that. So I said to Ahalya Matthan, and she said, what would you really like to do? I said, I'd like a loom and I'd like to do 9 designs of Venkatgiris from memory, all in white. Because Pupul had once described 5 shades of white, and I said, let's try it, And we did it. And we did it with Asli Sari, with real gold thread and natural, which is what Venkatgiri was. And we cut out all the color and, birds prancing around on the palla. We just went for the geometric. And put in a little bit of jamdani in it, because in the south, the rulers used to invite weavers from Banaras to put in the jamdani into a Venkatgiri sari. So we revived that again. And now that's gone back into the market. But the interesting story is that having done that and having sold, 200 saris on Instagram platform, the Tata fund, or whatever it's called, the Tata Foundation.
Tata Trust.
The Tata Trust went there and they're going to adopt those looms. So there's that has given a lot of pride to that weaver, and maybe he will tell his son to learn the art, do computer technology on a desk in the daytime, make his money, and learn how to weave in the evening. And that skill carries on because of consolidation by financial aid. So, but I did 2 projects, this and the other one. No, I did 4 actually. I did one in Rehwa Society, Richard Holkar and Sally Holkar had asked Muzaffar Ali, Subhashini, and myself to join them in recreating the Maheshwari sari, which was being woven only in the homes of the women in the villages around. And we created Rehwa Society. And now we're looking at having done it for 48 years. It's 48 years now. So I decided to do an Ahalya collection and just went back to the basics. I brought in all the old borders again. So that was one revival. And that then allows the weavers, not only in Rehwa, but in the village around, to add to their vocabulary. And that gives them a larger market. Indirectly. It's all indirect. There's no sort of tuition going on there. Then I did one by looking at the block prints that were done for cottage industries in the 60s by a woman called Prem Berry, who ran cottage industries. And the block printers were a company called Rangjot. So the son, we found him, and we found all the old blocks that were done then and did a whole collection of saris with the old blocks, Rangjot blocks, in memory of Prem Berry. And then I did the Venkatgiri one in memory of Prema Srinivasan. And I did one to celebrate Indira Gandhi's 100th birthday by taking 7 of her cotton South Indian Kanjivaram saris, because there's cotton in Kanjivaram too, and 7 Banarsis, and redid them exactly, but with pattern exactly, color different. So I took the colors, I said, let's just use Desi colors, Pyasi, which we call old rose, Haldi, Neem, Amavasya, Neil, and so on and so forth. Bengani, and we did 7 on each walk, and that was the collection. So that, for me, was like just giving myself something to do, basically. And it's taken off because now a lot of people are recreating them and adding to them. So,
Listening to you, Mala, and reading your book and what you just said, what you're recreating really, like I said at the beginning, your life almost entirely overlaps with independent India. And the people you describe, and there are others, right? In the book, there's Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay alongside Pupul Jayakar. There is your contemporary Laila Tyabji.
correct.
And these are incredible women. There's
Uzramma.
There's Uzramma with Malka, and I think we should talk about Malka Cotton in a minute.
Yeah, I think Uzramma Singh is just extraordinary.
Yeah.
You want me to quickly say something?
We will. I do. I think we should put that in context, and I'll provide the context, and then you must tell us about it. Because what we are doing, what we are hearing is a story which the political philosopher Sudipto Kaviraj calls the imaginary institutions of India. These institutions were set up post-independence, after 200 years of colonialism, to reclaim, revive, but also imagine a new India, to imagine what this independent India will be like, what is it going to be proud of. And the institutions such as the Khadi and Village Industries Corporation, KVIC, which had a very odd career, the Crafts Council of India. I mean, there was an institutional investment in recognizing and respecting. Can I just finish the thought? I think to finish that, is that these institutional inputs and schemes and recognizing master craftsmen, the festivals of India later, the setting up of an institution like Dastakar, which Laila Tyabji drove so ably for so many years and continues to be involved, which basically cuts out the middleman between craftspeople and the sale. So craftspeople could come and sell directly, but also or through Dastakar and get the profits, which has been a big problem in any kind of cottage industry. But also in places where craftspeople themselves come to sell, buyers get to meet weavers and craftspeople to see them at work and so on. So that respect and recognition of one's heritage and knowledge, civilizational knowledge, is seen, believed, imbibed, etc. And it has to be done through creating a political economy for it, as these institutions of India did. So all the people you're mentioning are people who were committed to institutions. These were not personal vanity projects. They were investing in a future, educating, engaging a wider population. Albeit, not all of the country has been educated. And what reading your book brings home very starkly is the need for that kind of institutional support and investment to create a new generation of Indians who would be aware of this knowledge and respect it and learn this aesthetic and grow to covet these extraordinary pieces of art, right? It's buying a sari is buying a piece of art. Every time you buy a handloom sari, that's effectively what you're doing. Well, that's the story I tell myself every time I buy a sari anyway.
No, but that's true. That's true. That is. I've got a slight disagreement here.
Okay. Go on.
It's not a disagreement, but I've had a rethink about this over the last few years. I think with the best intention in the world, when Panditji, and I'm going to put it in brackets like that, when Panditji set up those institutions, Lalit Kala, Sangeet Natak, Kala, Beaver Service Center was slightly different. All these institutions, they pulled and stuck them into alien environments. And they created an institution. The weaver was transported, I think like a little puppet, put there and said, now weave this for this. What was organic became now institutional. And then it fit in to 10 years, then it fell out, then it came in, and it made the skill vulnerable because it was put into an environment that was not conducive to the aesthetic and sensibilities of that skill and the weaver or the potter or whatever. So I'm just rethinking this in my own mind. What happened was a bastardization of the aesthetic, the motif, the color, everything changed. So it went down because people could not identify with it. Then it went up again because somebody like a Martand Singh or a Rajiv Sethi intervened. Then it came down again. I think that had we put the infrastructure, economic and marketing in situ, like we did the administrative chain from the BDO all the way up, had we created that, you would not have had a dip in artisanal growth and exposure. So when these institutions were conceived with the best interest, I mean, when Nehru conceived of it, his heart was in the right place. He wanted to, as you said, get this energy going again. But I think to pull it out of its home and put it in an alien space, you actually rattled the framework. And you got bastardized inputs in terms of the aesthetic, the motive, whatever. You then got these guys, instead of leading the market, we were being led by what we thought the market wanted. We hadn't even done the research on it. We thought that a woman would like to wear a mauve instead of purple.
Yeah.
And I'm saying mauve and purple particularly, because at that point we were trying to ape something. Our aspiration was across our borders. Purple is our color, Bengal. Mauve is not our color. And people started running away from that instinctively without knowing why they were running away from that color. So I think that all the Sangeet Natak, Lalit Kala, they worked for a little while Nehru was there backing it, and for a little while Indira was backing it, because she'd go and visit it, so everybody would go, the bureaucrat would take it seriously. Today, they don't take any of this seriously. These buildings are just falling apart. They are morgues. So you take the Jawahar Kala Kendra, it was meant to be something quite incredible. I mean, I know what I had to work on it to try and revive it when Vasundhara Raje was Chief Minister of Rajasthan. It was great task. She supported it, so it happened. But there are Jawahar Kala Kendras in every state capital. Do you even hear of that? So I think it helped kill the craft and the skill. I mean, I know this is a very controversial statement. I think we should have put in the infrastructure for the artisan community across the board, whether it is building techniques, arai, its wall surface covering, it's better than any oil paint. Architectural techniques, brick making. We had techniques from the times of the Mughals. Weaving, pottery, I don't know, you can just go on and on. Anything you look at, brass, damascening, marble, sculpture, all of this. Had we put in that infrastructure and given them a marketing line alongside, I just a dream, alongside the administrative line, which is there in place, you would not have had this traffic moving in to the smaller towns, becoming alien, not knowing how to live, not knowing how to live in a concrete structure and create something beautiful when they may create those things outside their homes under a tree. So I think we killed the sap of creativity, or diminished it, let me put it that way. So as an experiment, I managed to convince Ahalya Matthan to do an exhibition of saris in Anaigundi village in Hampi. Everyone said to her, "You're mad, why are you listening to Mala?" We tied up with Shama Pawar, who is working in Anaigundi with women, empowering women in a very conservative society where the men hated that the women are working. And she's doing work with hyacinth and making baskets and, a lot of interesting work. So he had restored 4 huts. UNESCO had taken part in the restoration of one of them, and then 4 more were done. And then she needed some money to clean up the Chauraha and all that. And I got a friend of mine in Bombay, Saris of Memory, please write a blank check and send it to her. We're going to have this exhibition there. Everyone mocked it. But we had students from IIM come, interact with all the local people. I mean, the lessons they learned, they wouldn't learn in a lifetime. You spend 2 days in Anaigundi talking to the local people, eating their food, living their life. You learn much more than you'd learn listening to a lecture on it. And one morning, I saw 2 chaps walking around who looked as though they'd come from the north. And I said, "Aap kahan se aaye hain?" "Banaras." So I said, "Kaise pata chala कि यहाँ कुछ हो रहा है?" "Instagram."
Wow.
I said, "और टिकट खरीद के आ गए और हम देख रहे हैं ये नुमाइश, हमारी भी साड़ियां इधर टंगी हुई हैं." Now, for me, that was the best thing that happened that year, as far as I was concerned. You don't have to have them in the hordes, but it teaches you that these Instagram, all these things are a trigger for the imagination, the remolding, the rebuilding, the connectivity again. I mean, 2 guys, weavers from Banaras, sitting in Hampi, in their wildest of dreams, they would not have come there. The institution, when it's funded by government, it becomes moribund because the government changes and the priority changes. So under Nehru, it was a priority. Indira, it was a priority.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't become a priority under Narasimha Rao. I mean, it's not even political because his priority is World Bank and, a different model. It was not parallel models of economic growth. It was, now let's move out of the parallel and go into a singular model of economic growth to join the world market. Unnecessary because the parallel lines may have taken us even beyond. But so that's why it has to be public-private partnership or public ownership.
And actually, so much of the innovation, so much of the work you're describing that you've done, people around you have done, are in the non-governmental space as well, as much
So you
as
look at
anything.
Laila, it's non-governmental.
Exactly. Look at Dastakar, yeah, absolutely.
Or even Jaya Jaitley when she started
That's right, yeah.
Dilli Haat. I mean,
Yeah.
she was the pioneer.
Absolutely. And Dilli Haat is what I was thinking of as an example of people coming to meet craftspeople from all over, and the fact that every fortnight there was a different group of people there.
I mean, this could be an endless conversation, but I just want to wind this up on a slightly, a lot of our audience does not live in India. So a lot of these references might be alien to them. I hope they will look them up. One very quick reference is Mala mentioned Ahalya Matthan twice. She is again, somebody who runs a registry of Sari. She's an archivist. She's studying textiles. She's also self-taught, and she's doing some remarkable work with Indian textiles and saris across the world. Of course,
I
not the
just want
least of
to
it
tell
is what.
you, that's what the excitement is. She is a nose. She's a trained nose from the south of France. She's a perfumer. She comes from a family of traditional perfume, attar and agarbatti, the largest, makers of that. Love for the unstitched cloth, for the sari, through a mother, a grandmother, and has made this a new profession. Sorry.
And mentors like yourself. But that is what I wanted to actually come to and end this on. Because, the thing is, I grew up. I grew up in the 80s. I grew up when the power loom was ubiquitous, and Vimal, Garden, Vareli ads were all over television. And it was the era of that kind of, print that I was growing up in. And when I was growing up in the 80s, I was growing up in Calcutta, and, Suti sari was suddenly not fashionable anymore, and Muku, you talk about the 80s in Delhi when, all these college girls and were wearing textiles, but something quite different was going on in Calcutta, where there was this idea of the Suti being sort of a poor
Dowdy.
person's, a dowdy,
Dowdy.
poor
Dowdy is the
person,
correct word.
clothing. And these prints were everywhere. And then, of course, I was ushered into another era when India's fashion boom happened. And as a result of the fashion boom, because the fashion industry is an industry worth billions and it's an international industry, but it's led by the wedding market. The kind of saris that were being produced were again, they may be referencing some of our old textiles and traditions, but there was a lot of sequins, there was a lot of unrooted aesthetic as well. And I think that's where Mala's book does a great service, because it reorients people towards what the Indian aesthetic, and of course, it's a very diverse thing. And I keep saying this, but it bears repetition that there is no one Indian aesthetic, but, different strands of Indian aesthetic that have been lost is what someone like Mala reintroduces, and therefore reintroduces the love for these things that are in our veins, but we've not had access to this vocabulary, to this archive. And I have to say that Mala is actually greatly responsible for my rediscovering my love for cottons. And again, I will contextualize this. When I was growing up, I loved cotton, but even I thought that there's only a certain kind of sari that you do in cotton. Even I was prey to this sort of dichotomy of the cotton is what you wear in the day when you're going out to report, and the silk is what you wear in the evening for your cocktails. And Mala, I think, single-handedly has sort of rewired my brain to acknowledge that there are beautiful Kanjivarams and Paithanis and Banarsis that are considered to be our rich evening saris that are also woven in cotton. And of course, to bring to us the diversity of the kinds of weaves and embroidery that are available to us. You write about Tangalia, you write about, sort of these lesser known traditions of sari making. And that is what was going to be my last question to you, Mala. What are the kinds of saris you'd like to see more of? And then I'll take this question to you, Muku. If you live in London, and if you had to introduce two kinds of saris to people who are not very familiar with very traditional Indian saris, what would they be? But first, Mala.
I think the Paithani needs to be relooked. I think the paitani has been really changed. It's not a silk sari. It was traditionally a cotton sari, a very, very fine cotton sari with a brocaded border, silk border. That technique of silk and cotton on the border, because the border then weighs down the cotton, and it's a splendid sari. Its motifs were just very fine. You don't see that at all. And it's gone into silk because it's easier to weave silk. Cotton, fine thread of cotton snap. You're really in trouble. You have to weave it with great dexterity. So I would like to see that brought into the market because that would work everywhere. It's geometric pattern. It is not ethnic to any region. It's a universal pattern. It's flower, it's stripe, it's no pattern at all. It's a dot, any color palette. It's got a lot of very dull real gold in it. It's always done in real gold zari, not in tested zari. And I think in many ways it represents the tradition of cotton because that was our tradition. The British took it away and silk came in, but we always wove in cotton. And the finest saris were done in cotton. The sari that goes through a ring, the jamdani, was cotton, it was never silk. One would imagine silk would go through a ring easier, but the cotton went through a ring. Like did the shatush. So now the shatush is out of the window, so it's a jamdani, and they can still weave like that. So I think fine cotton sari with real zari would be the signature, I think, for high-end saris. And for the other, I'd use regular cotton. I would just stick to cotton. For me, cotton represents India, the unstitched length of cloth, and therefore my civilization.
Excellent. Mukul. Well, let me answer your question slightly differently, picking up from where Malvika just ended, that cotton, we said we would tell the story. I think it's really worth telling the story very briefly, that the reason why cotton goes out, it's a story about the Industrial Revolution, right?
Yeah.
And
correct.
what
So
this inequality between a certain aesthetic, Indian textiles, this whole story of loss and revival that we've been talking about is really a colonial story, but it's also a story of the Industrial Revolution. You have mills come up in Britain that are hungry for raw material. That's the colonial project. You have a hinterland producing cotton. You force people to grow cotton, which is a cash crop, and you force farmers to grow indigo, which is required for the dyeing process. But the violence doesn't end there. It ends in what is done to the cotton. So the cotton, which is a big, fluffy product in India, has to be transported to Britain. So through a process of heat, you compress them into bales that can be loaded onto ships, brought to Britain, and then again decompressed before they can be woven into yarn and then woven into cloth by machines. This process actually violates the structure of cotton itself. It loses its texture, its softness, etc. It's hugely energy dependent, all of this heat and decompressing and so on. And so what you get as a fine cotton is not the cotton that has been grown in India. We mentioned Uzramma and her revival, single-handed revival of Malka cotton, as it's
fantastic.
called, has been amazing. And I remember her telling me this story at a conference in Pavia in Italy, at a conference when we were quite rightly celebrating and thinking about colonialism and the Swadeshi movement for independence. And, we've had this whole conversation. Gandhi is very present. We should mention that this was also a story about reclaiming owning your right to freedom through a statement through clothing. Gandhi is very present in this conversation because Gandhi's emphasis on Khadi, right, of homespun, hand-woven cotton, that's what Khadi is, was really a statement of self-reliance, of Swadeshi, of owning your own civilization, owning the ownership of your independence had to be demonstrated through self-reliance, not just saying that the colonial project was wrong or the colonial masters had to be thrown out, but also demonstrating how you could be self-reliant. So the reclamation of cotton through Khadi is absolutely, central to the story of Indian independence. And that's why a lot of this impetus to set up institutions or think about what is going to happen to this Khadi. And as Mala said, there've been many mistakes made and there've been many corrections to it as well. I'd like us to end on a hopeful note, that we see through the completely unpredictable use of Instagram and social media that is happening. We should also say the sari has, I think, for me, it seems to have revived amongst a group of women in India who had kind of given up on it because of a revolution in ready-made blouses, right? A sari is always worn with a small crop top, which is a blouse, and an underskirt, a petticoat, a drawstring petticoat. And the fact that you don't need to run to tailors, which is sad for tailors, but has also made it a lot more accessible. And there is some sort of revival in India in women choosing to wear the sari more, young women choosing to wear the sari more, and extraordinary influencers on social media teaching people how to tie the sari. So anyone listening to this podcast who might be curious about this, just go and look on Instagram, find Dolly Jen. I mean, she's my favorite. You may have others. She fills you with confidence. And as to go back to your question, Pragya, about London, it's not, how can I mean, there are many people in India who will revive, I'm sure, many of the beautiful weaves that India has. What my aspiration really is that there is such a huge Indian diaspora, right? That is so proud to be Indian. And half the diaspora could be wearing saris more. And they have wealth. Not all of the diaspora are wealthy. We must remember that. But there is a large part of the Indian diaspora that has enough wealth to invest in handloom and wear them more, not again just as costumes for weddings and Diwali, but to wear it as clothing as their friends, sisters, mothers do in India. Wear them with a greater confidence. We need to see it on the landscape more. I feel it's rather lonely to be in London, to be the only working woman of my class, to be wearing a sari on the London Underground. I wish more people would. That's my wish.
Well, may your wish be granted. For one, this time when I'm coming to London, I'm coming with saris. I promise you that. So at least there'll be two of us.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mala. You're single-handedly responsible for this again, as you are for many other things. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you very
Congratulations.
So that's it from us on this episode of the India Briefing. Both Pragya and I are hugely energized, inspired by this conversation, thinking about India's inheritance, her extraordinarily civilizational aesthetic in so many different forms. And we think it may be a good moment to maybe start a campaign for anyone listening. If you want to adopt a loom, maybe one loom supports a family of 5. And we can think of ways in which we can make such a scheme happen where anyone, anywhere in the world, perhaps could put money into adopting one loom. Thank you all for listening. See you next time.